Let's go to Steve Schmidt and the other part of the story, the Republican part of the story. Here is Steve Schmidt, who obviously has a lot to say about Sarah Palin. Here he was voicing his thoughts on 60 Minutes last night. Let's listen.
I said, you know, if this project goes forward, you'll be one of the most famous people in the world by Friday. Will you be able to live with that? She said she would be able to. She was very calm, nonplussed. I said, you don't seem nervous at all about this, and she said, no, it's God's plan.
Why is that controversial, Chuck?
Oh, I don't know if it's controversial. I think what stupefies a lot of people in Washington is sort of like, how is it that she didn't have at least some, you know, any other person in American politics would have shown a little bit of nervousness, and she wasn't showing any. But let's remember the context of this. I think Steve Schmidt, he's been keeping his powder dry ever since the release of Palin's book, and I think he saw an opportunity to try to answer quietly and subtly some of the critiques that she threw his way. Okay. This is a feud that isn't going to go away between Steve Schmidt and Sarah Palin.
This is what I like about politics, catching politicians not knowing what they're talking about. Howard, you know this is my bread and butter. Here is, according to the authors of this new book, and they're incredibly credible authors, Heilman and Halpern, here's what they said. Palin, this is a quote, Palin couldn't explain, this is getting ready for a big debate with Biden, couldn't explain why North and South Korea were separate nations. She had no idea what the Korean War was, apparently, never heard of it. She didn't know what the Fed did, the Federal Reserve, that is our central banking system. They asked who attacked on 9/11, and she suggested several times it was Saddam Hussein. Is she the target of the misinformation campaign? And she was asked to identify the enemy that her son would be fighting in Iraq, and she drew a blank. Now, maybe that last one's not so hard to explain. I mean, it is hard to know who the latest insurgents are. But the fact is, not knowing the Korean War, I understand she also didn't really quite get the First and Second World War. I mean, this is tabula rasa here.
Well, a couple things, Chris. First of all, what this book provides, and I've read most of it now, is a lot of novelistic detail on an overarching story that we already knew. Those are devastating details. I'm assuming they're true because these guys worked hard on this thing. The level of ignorance is astounding. But the other thing that Steve Schmidt and others are doing, perhaps without fully realizing it, is that they're further underscoring their own, I think, borderline irresponsibility in picking her. I mean, even Dick Cheney said in another passage in the book, this woman is not qualified. And yet they were willing to go ahead with the ticking time bomb that she was at that point. Maybe she's learned a lot since. Maybe she'll learn a lot if she runs. Maybe she'll learn a lot being a pundit on Fox News. But at the time they picked her...
How can she be a pundit? She doesn't know anything. Let me go back.
Well,
let me go to Chuck.
That's my point. It was a dangerous thing to do.
You make it well. Chuck, what grabbed me was that great phrase by Steve Schmidt, and I know we all in this business heard it before, when he says this put-away line, she doesn't know anything.
It was look, this is where it came from Steve Schmidt. You know, this isn't the quote. I mean, the fact that he chose to basically underscore the Halpern-Heilman reporting. You know, they had it, you know, obviously they had spent a lot of time with him. And he went ahead and did that 60 Minutes interview. That's less about doing a favor for promoting the book and more about, I think, settling a score with Governor Palin a little bit. But also, it may be just a confessional of his own right. You know, it goes to Howard's point going, you know, boy, we may have made a strategic not a strategic mistake, actually. Steve corrected himself. Strategically, he made the case that Palin actually, that McCain lost by fewer percentage points because of Palin than if she hadn't been on the ticket. I agree with that, but I think he feels guilty.
Also, but having talked to Schmidt myself about this within the last 24 hours, Chris, you know, I think he is at best ambivalent, and probably, as Chuck says, regretful, remorseful that the way things came down heading into St. Paul, Minnesota, was to pick Sarah Palin in that condition at that time, given what she was.